So today we have Devin Yalkin, who is a photographer living in the New York area. Devin shoots for a lot of some of the best editorial clients you can have. New Yorker, New York Magazine, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, Mother Jones. And he's going to kind of walk us through his work, ask lots of questions because he's very smart about photography. Ostensibly, this talk is kind of about developing a voice as a photographer, which, kind of as Devin and I were talking, isn't something that I think most photographers, it kind of happens more than actually setting out to do it, which I think is, and Devin's work has a very particular look. And when you see a photograph, or at least when I see photographs in a magazine, I can almost say, oh, Devin Yalkin took that, which is a really important trait to have as a photographer. And it's why Devin gets good work, because editors hire him because they want a certain look and feel to the work, and he's honed that. So that's something we'll talk about in addition to just like getting work as a photographer, which we all want to do. So Devin, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
As far as the voice goes, I was talking to Mark, and it's nothing anyone should ever stress about. Like, you shoot and certain things will resonate and certain things will speak to you over time. And the things that like really grab you and that are kind of more of the guttural sensation, like the things that you're attracted to most, like realize those things and then understand why you're attracted to those things and keep going after them. I think the voice thing just happens naturally over time. I don't think it's anything that should ever be stressed about. I mean, I knew that black and white spoke to me in a way that other, color felt too suggestive. Black and white kind of was a blank canvas for me, and, figuring out what kind of tonal range you liked, and high contrast, gritty imagery was something that I was always attracted to because of like a lot of 1970s contemporary Japanese, a lot of 70s like William Klein, Moriyama, Anders Peterson particularly. It was a very intimate way of looking at the world, and it felt more like it was treated as a diaristic approach as opposed to kind of a more journalistic reportage attempt at like seeing life. So I felt that a diaristic approach would kind of mirror my experience. Anyone who I'm spending time with, I want to have, an intimate portrait of. I want that to resonate. I want, whatever I see in the person to come out through their eyes, not just a, snapshot of somebody. Yeah.
It's funny you mention that because I never thought I had a style or voice. And then one day I was speaking to a class, somebody else's class, showing my work and just kind of looking at it kind of all together like that.
Yeah. I know your work. I mean, it's like, it has its own.
It's like, oh, I do have a voice without, and that's, that was just like 4 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. And like, you have to kind of, put photos up and like on a wall, especially like the physicality of photography is a necessity. I mean, we're mostly digital life right now. So, when you were editing for your the book that you're going to do, it's like, it's so important to, print out those 4x6s and, have the physicality, like, sequence, narrate, like put them up on a wall, rearrange. Because right now it's like, even with editorial work, it's as beautiful as it is and as fun as it is as soon as you're done, you're in front of a screen like this again. And there's no really getting a sense of the gravity of the work, or you're seeing images kind of one at a time or in a cluster on a small screen. So you don't understand the magnitude of the work. You don't understand, you need to see a layout in order to understand what the work is about.
Why don't you throw some photos up? I have some questions. Specifically, kind of when you were starting out, walking into editors' offices, with this black and white work, what was their response?
was their response in the beginning? Um, it was a bit hard because it was a hodgepodge, and I remember having one professor say that at school, and I understood that it was kind of like there was no like thematic sensibility. It was all wanderings, and like in my early days, it was a lot of streets, so it was all about hunting for that decisive moment, and that eventually became a little too matter of fact for me because it was more about finding that exact moment than having any context and any resonance and any intimacy with the people that I've been photographing. So when I was showing work, I think the early two bodies of work that I had that were somewhat thematic were the Aqueduct racetrack in Queens and my underground boxing work, and then acoustic movements, which was my first kind of semi-cohesive, let me pull that up, body of work. And it was, for me, I guess these editors weren't too familiar with, you know, my inspirations. So maybe it seemed a bit new to them. But these photographers that I've been following, I mean, it's like I wasn't trying to copy them, but they inspired me to, view the world in a way that it was my first experience shooting anything kind of personal, and it happened to be street. And when I went into it, I mean, like, this is all kind of run and gun work. So they kind of started hiring me for reportage. Like, they know that I can kind of enter a situation. Um, you know, Editorial work came much later, so it started with more kind of run and gun work. Um, they knew that they would get a certain, sensibility out of me. I consider the work to be kind of, a shift in paradigm between documentary and fine art. So they wanted something different, and I, was always harping on kind of pushing the work and seeing the world more abstractly and not giving the answer, but kind of posing a question with the photographs. Because I think just sending the punchline right away is there's no point to that, because you get the photo immediately. And I think that's the problem with a lot of photography and journalism, is like people will give you the answer right away without letting you linger on with a question. So, I mean, mood for me was also kind of an essential a part of making work. Um, I wanted, there to be some, you know, longing, some resonance, like, wanting to go back to certain images because they meant something. I mean, at least they meant something to me. But it was very important to, push images out there that um, that are poetic, and that give people something to linger on. And like a lot of that work and this next work that I'm showing you, um, which is my first monograph, is like creating images that, um, as if you're waking up from a dream and you had these kind of faint glimmerances as to what the images, like the last thing that you remember from the dream. And these images, for me, that idea I wanted to transpose onto my photographs. So the images that you're seeing are kind of like, you wake up and, like, halfway through the day, you're like, oh shit, like I just remember my dream, and you just have like certain frames that kind of pop out. So that was also important for me as a photographer, to kind of use this as an idea for my work. And it helped, when I would have meetings, like they would see it and they be like, this work is kind of weird. Um, and I think that's what intrigued people to kind of hire me in the beginning.
Yeah. Let's see.
Am I going too fast or too slow?
No, it's good. There's a question here about
Yeah.
uh, talking a little bit about the photographers who influenced you early on as well as later. I mean, you kind of mentioned a few names, but
Yeah. Yeah. Anders Peterson, I would say mainly. J.H. Engstrom. Um, a lot of the prospect guys that I worked with. Francesco Merlini is great. I mentioned William Klein. I mentioned Moriyama. I have like a whole list of photographers that I'm blanking on. My friend Yusuf Sevinçli. Um, but the older stuff, I have like a proper list that I'm not thinking of, but I can write, I could write it down and send to you for the class. Um, where's the other one? There's that.
So you mentioned kind of this, especially with the I'll see you tomorrow work, like this
Yeah,
idea of kind of waking, like getting these moments from a dream.
yeah.
Did you conceptualize that first, or were you making images and then kind of see it as you were looking at the images and it's like, oh, this is kind of what that work is?
I was looking at the work around the time that I had to write an artist statement, and it felt that these were kind of very ephemeral photographs. They were always kind of fleeting. Um, and it's something that I just wanted to hold on to as much as I could. So it just made sense for me as like, the moment you wake up and you're trying as hard as you can to remember these, the last details of your dream. So that kind of came naturally. And I think that's a part of the whole idea of finding a voice, is realizing and recognizing your sensibilities as an artist. And if it's like crystal clear, crispy, colorful, saturated still lifes, then that's, another voice, that's another artistic approach. But for me, like, these were kind of more in line with my idea in terms of like finding a sense of longing in photographs, and like finding something that's um, for me deep and resonates, longer than just looking at, the image once.
Hmm. So I have a question that's kind of personally motivated, I guess, for lack of a
Yeah.
better way of putting it. But when you're first setting out, like showing work, showing this work to editors, um, did they ever ask you or say, this is nice work, can you shoot color?
Always.
And,
And
and then
that's a
so I guess the follow up to that is, how do you hold on to the way you want to work, knowing that getting less work, holding on to the way that you want to shoot versus shooting what they want you to shoot?
Yes, that's a good question. It was conflicting at first, but there's a part of every photographer, I think, in the start of their career, where a little compromise needs to happen. Because that question, I completely forgot that used to be a thing. Like, I remember my first meeting with, I think, New York Magazine, and they, after years, I just worked for them for the first time this year, after being active since like kind of 2011. Um, the first thing they said to me after I showed them my work is, "Do you shoot in color?" And I was like, "No, but I can. But unless you have a voice in color, like, you're not going to get that work." And I think that's something that I worked on loosely over the years. But a lot of the early gigs, that I was doing was like shooting vows for the Times and shooting like restaurants and food, and that had to be in color. So I had to make do with that. But to me, that was just a job that I needed to get done and get over with. And going back to my work and keeping that train going in a visual sense, and like harnessing my look and the context of my work and the feeling of my work was more important. So I would do those jobs, but I would always go back to my own work and continue to work on that and develop those bodies and then show them again. So the next time that I had a meeting, there was more clarity in my intention, and the vision had been developed. So the questions stopped coming, do I shoot in color? And at this point in my career, editors 99% of the time aren't asking me to send an edit in color. I just send everything in black and white tone, the way exactly, the way I want to.
I mean, it's kind of like I've told my class where, I think especially smart editors are hiring you for what you bring to the table. They're
Yeah.
not, I'm hiring Devin Yalkin for your vision and not because I want to direct you in terms of how to make
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I'm very humbled, and like I'm a very fortunate stage in my career where I can just do that, and like without a second guess.
Yeah.
You know, the question doesn't come up at all now.
Yeah. I mean, I was asking because I just, remember like going to New York Times and being at Eddie Adams, and that was like the very first question I got. It's like
Yeah, do you shoot in
showing this
color?
body of work in black and white, and they're like, "Oh, this is really nice. Can you shoot in color?" It's like, anybody can shoot. Like, yes, I can make a color picture, but
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not going to be any better than anybody else.
It's not going to be a Mark Merman. It doesn't, a color photo is not going to mean anything
Right.
to you personally,
Right.
if you're shooting it.
So let's um, I guess kind of let's move to the boxing project, I guess,
Yeah,
or just kind of when you started working on kind of this kind of more repertorial documentary type project, and kind of is that the body of work that kind of helped you start getting recognition, or kind of what point, how did it
exactly.
play into
So
your career?
in the editorial world, this body of work was what resonated the most and what started getting me hired for jobs. This was first published in Time Lightbox, and then New York Times called me. One of the editors, Nico Kopel, hit me up and was like, "Come in, let's have a meeting." And this is what I kind of pitched out as my tweaking the paradigm of journalism and fine art, and kind of trying to mesh the two. A lot of it's in kind of a more transient long exposure. There's lots of details, lots of grit, but the long exposure thing happened unintentionally. This is the days where I used to shoot film, which I'm sad to say that that's kind of um, I'm not doing as much as I would like to. But I'm going into the situation and shooting with a Ricoh and a Leica, and the Ricoh is like an automatic camera, and it wasn't picking up. Some of them are digital, but 90% of them are black or are film. Um, so I like got the first roll of film back, and I see that the exposures are, there is a bit of transience being captured. There's a lag, and there's, the flash was going off. I was using other people's flashes. But after I got this roll of film back, I looked at the work and I was like, this is actually a good segue into finding the vision. Like I realized that I wasn't in full control, but I realized that the mistake was something that I wanted to elaborate on. So,
Will you put it up?
going back, say again.
Will you put the work up?
Yeah, yeah. Are you not seeing it?
No, your
Have I been
screen's not
going?
sharing.
Oh, I've been going this whole time, not sharing the work. Okay, let me start again. Okay, where's the Zoom?
Did we lose him? Looks like we lost him. There he is.
Third time using Zoom. My bad. Okay, share screen. Desktop. Share.
There it is.
Okay. So as I was mentioning before, there's a lot of things that I didn't initially go with the intention of, having this look. But as soon as I brought my first roll of film back and scanned it, I was like, this is awesome. I want to elaborate on this. So the second time I went with intention, I let, the shutter drag. I was using other people's flashes, for my benefit. And it was something that I was able to kind of pitch as work that's relatively different than, what other people had been doing. At least I thought so. So this work kind of put me on the map in terms of reportage. And this is the kind of stuff, like this is work that I sold over and over again. This work kind of, circulated around the world, actually, just different magazines picking it up, exhibitions overseas. And this was kind of my calling card in terms of what I was, capable of in um, you know, hiring situations. Um, but the long exposure aspect of it, I had worked on before on a separate body of work, which I can show you guys.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, this body of work was like definitely the first thing that really had an editorial circulation. Acoustic Movements was more. Um, I felt like it was picked up a bit more by fine art community.
Hmm.
Um, and let me just show you without hanging up again. This is a body of work that I had done my senior year of college, and this was um, all single exposure, long exposure, crowd shots. Not all crowds, but um, this was kind of delving into the idea of phantasmagoria and like my idea of Greek and Roman mythology and my idea of what I thought Hades would look like, the underworld. And it's a body of work that I've been meaning to go back to and really kind of spend time working on, and I haven't. But this body of work, I really do want to get back to it because I felt like it was pretty powerful, and um, it just it was going out with the intention of shooting one thing, which is something that I generally don't do.
Hmm.
My approach is always very guttural. I'm always kind of a diaristic, see the world around me, and whatever happens happens. I'm not a setup guy.
Hmm.
Um, but this was like intentional work that I went 3 or 4 times, and I just really wanted to like get in there and make weird work. And it turned out to be really cool. And I don't know, talking about it now, I just can't imagine people being this close to one another again. Um, but yeah, it's like there's multiple ways of working to slowly figure out, what it is you want to talk about, what your voice is supposed to be like. Right now, I feel like I'm honed in on kind of one vision. And
Hmm.
if you see my work from the very beginning, my street work to this work to my current work, they all look very different. I mean, it's all black and white, but they feel much different than one another.
Hmm. Um, so there's a question here, but I was going to kind of get to this also. What led you to move away from film, and kind of how has that move away from film changed your work?
I sigh. Editorial work kind of killed it. Quick turnaround times, the money not being worth me spending my time dropping off my film, picking it up, scanning it, then sending it out, then doing the final retouching. I think it's the turnaround time. I feel like if certain publications would give, months in advance
Hmm.
um, before a publishing date, I'd be more than happy to shoot film. But the immediacy of film, I mean, the immediacy of digital with editorial work kind of just killed the whole film game for me.
Hmm.
Um, and money was an aspect too. It's like when you have it, it's like buy film, shoot it, develop it, all that. Um, but for me, it's like now I feel like I've gotten to a point with my digital work that I've been able to make it look as much as much like film as my film work did.
And how long did it take that? I've been really curious about that process too.
It's post. It's a lot of post.
Yeah.
And it took a while. Like I feel like certain. I mean, I hate to overwork images, but I want to be able to accomplish the same thing that I would be able to do in the darkroom
Hmm.
in a digital image. But I feel like as an artist, you should never give yourself limitations, because once you do that, you're kind of killing any potential with future ideas.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the film feeling for me was like the resonance of grain and the feeling of texture was really important to me. And like, I felt that digital images weren't doing that for me. So I spent a lot of time really working on um, texture and tone and giving that same feeling that um, my work used to. And I'm trying my hardest to make digital look like film.
Mhm.
Actually, I shot this when I was on assignment for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks like the climate thing you did.
Yeah,
There's a
that's
question
actually,
here kind of about the
yeah.
technical process a little bit. Are
Yeah.
you using presets for a certain consistency in the work, or kind of how do you dial in this kind of working
I
to
I
give it
work in Lightroom a lot.
hmm
Um, I shoot in black and white. I import it into Lightroom, and then I just play with tones.
hmm
Like I can dial in pretty quickly what it is that I generally use.
hmm
Um, I play with the highlights. I play with the shadows. Um, I run the work, a few times with like maybe some filters from Lightroom, but I like generally kind of um, doing it on my own.
hmm
Um, and I could actually get into some of the quarantine work, which I've included in this. But um, yeah, it's I forgot what the question is now.
Oh, just kind of the process for maintaining a consistency, kind of the back
Oh,
end
yeah,
process.
yeah. I mean, that's a part of the looking at the work overall. Like you have to have prints up, you have to have, some physicality to it, and look at them all at the same time. You'll notice thumbnails if you're looking at it digitally that stick out compared to the rest. So if you see that inconsistency, you go back and change those few images and, hone in on what it is that separates them, whether it's the highlights or the shadows, and make them look as consistent as possible. That's a part of um, what it to find your voice is
Mhm.
about consistency.
Yep. And so, kind of stepping back a little bit,
Yeah.
so you did the boxing, the kind of the boxing work, and that got you a little bit of recognition. And how did that kind of change things for you? Like, what kind of assignments were you getting after that work as opposed to before?
um so a lot of the assignments that I had been getting after the boxing was one of those things that it was like the gift that kept on giving. Like I was able to publish it with different outlets over and over again.
hmm
um But in terms of getting work for that, I had Stern magazine have me continue that body of work, and then I think that was trying to remember my earlier assignments. Like it would be black and white, going out into the streets and like either taking a portrait or making an ordinary situation. I remember this one of my first shoots for the New York Times. My editor asked me to shoot um, Broadway, like one of the plays that was happening, and they wanted me to do like long exposure with a crowd. So
hmm
that was like asking me to go out and do that trick, jump through the hoop, and that was kind of annoying, but it's something that I had been working on for a while. So I was like, all right, they want me to do what I had been doing before. I'm going to entertain them with that. Um, so like a lot of those assignments, it wasn't like I got boxing assignments because of the boxing work.
Okay. hmm
I wasn't getting hired to do like super underground gritty stuff. They expected the look to be that way, but I wasn't necessarily getting those jobs. That was for you as well.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So some of it's film, some of it's digital.
And so this is kind of a question that came up when we were talking to Preston Ganaway, and I'm curious about your take on it. So if when New York Times calls you and like, hey, we want you to do this trick that you do in your photos,
Yeah.
um, kind of how do you approach that? I mean, I mean, kind of what I've talked about a little bit is like, do the trick, do what they're expecting you to do, but then do you
Surprise.
also make images that you feel are more appropriate to the story, and you file those along with the
I always file them. I'll do what they need me to do. Most of the time now, I mean, back then I did what they needed me to do. Now, um, I don't get instruction now, which is great. They tell me what the story is, and they give me the location, and they set up all the stuff, and I go and I just do my thing and I send it. And I always, and this is really important for editorial work, never ever send what you don't want to be shown. It's something that I wish I had learned years ago, and I regret um, not doing it. Like, I've sent work that I just was not proud of at all, and it's been published.
It's
And
they always pick the pictures you don't like.
yeah, and as much as the internet's an abyss, like, it's still there attached to your name. It's not necessarily the first thing that's going to come up, but it's there. Um, I always send in the weirder work. I always want to send in the more heartfelt work, the more abstract work, in hopes of them kind of coming to terms with um, my intentions and what I want them um, to do, to publish.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Um,
this is one of I think one of my, not first assignments for New York Times Magazine, but I think like it was one of the first times where they just kind of sent me out and didn't tell me anything. They just gave me, I worked with Chris Chivers on this, about a Marine with PTSD who blacked out drunk and broke into someone's home that he thought was his own and got into a fight with another Marine in the house. Didn't remember a thing, got, hit in the head, no, got stabbed 7 times and was flighted to a hospital, had no recollection of any of it, ended up going to jail for it. And then Chris Chivers, who's a New York Times staffer, caught wind of the story, and they called me to photograph it. And I think it was one of the first times where they just gave me, like, they set up the plane ticket, hotel, and all of that, and they just told me, where to go. And then I just, literally recorded everything with my eyes and sent it back to them.
That's great. I mean, Troy Colby just asked basically exactly that, kind of how long did it take to get to the point of not getting instructions from editors?
Years. I would say I bartended for about 12 years. I got canned from my bartending job in 2013 and started working full-time photography late 2013, early 2014. But I would say it took until about 2016 not to get any instructions. Just to go out, record the world, come back, and show what I had, experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing this in the New York Times Magazine, and this, and then also the shoot you did in Alaska.
Oh yeah.
In
Montana.
In Montana.
The Warriors.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was definitely where I was like, oh, this guy is doing something different and getting hired for
it. This is about a basketball team on a Native American reservation in Arlene, Montana. And this was another one of those things where it's like, go, collect, bring back. I mean, it's part of it's like a scavenger hunt, and I hate to treat it like that, because a lot of these trips are very meaningful, and like a lot of these kids and like their parents, I'm like still actually in touch with. I'm in touch. These are 2 brothers. One's like 6'9" and one's like 6'5", and I'm texting on a regular basis back and forth with their aunt and uncle still, and this is like 2 years after the fact. And as much as this is like go and come back, I get what you can, and show us what you got. This is like, I don't know, all these experiences are incredibly meaningful for me, because even the last body of work I showed you of the Marine, like, his mother was so thankful to us, and like we kept in such great touch. She made a quilt for my son, like a really beautiful hand knit quilt. And I'm still in touch with like the majority of people. Like a lot of the feature stories that I work on, I'm still in touch with the people that I photographed, because that's I don't know if that's ethical in terms of journalism, but like these are my experiences, and um, the fact that I have developed these relationships with these people are more important than taking the photos. I think, as Anders Peterson says, it's like it's not about photography. It's about, your human experience and like how you can relate to people. And it's not about, that actual one photograph. It's about, your experience with them. Um, and I try to kind of do both at the same time because this is work.
Hmm.
So I've found that common ground where, I'm not overstepping, ethical boundaries, but I'm also connecting with people in a way that, I will have, some of these people hopefully in my life for the rest of my life.
Hmm. And a quick kind of nuts and bolts question
Yeah.
that I think I get asked a lot in class is kind of, so when, like on this assignment, how many days did you get for this? Like how long do you have on the ground to get these kind of images?
So this shoot was 3 trips, one in the summer and 2 winter trips. The first one was in 2016 or 17, and the
Hmm.
last two I think were in 2017 or 18. But each trip was about 3 days. First day is always getting acclimated, and the first day you always feel like a tourist, especially in a place that you haven't visited before. Like the landscape is different. For me, I try to get past all of that as quickly as possible. There's certain identifiable like markers in places. Like, I mean, you go to Paris, you see the Eiffel Tower, you're going to see like a whole onslaught of photographs. Like if you type in any location to Google, you'll see the kind of general um, consensus of what people are gravitating towards. And those markers to me are kind of tourist traps in a way. So I try to avoid those and try to figure out what it is I'm there for and what it is I'm there to do. And I always talk about having clarity with intention.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important to kind of, when you're at these places and when you have these jobs, remember that you're a person first and a photographer second, because that takes you much farther, especially even with simple portraiture, like whether it's like a politician or anybody else, a musician. Like you want to connect on a human level and you want to mirror um, a certain experience. And like I think when you come forth as a person first, instead of like a paparazzi or someone who's trying to just get in and get out and get the images, I think you connect on a deeper level, and I think you come back with more um, more interesting work.
Hmm.
Um, does that answer that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So two questions popped up, um, kind of related to this. When you go out on something like this, do you have kind of a shot list? Do you make up kind of what you're expecting based on the story, or is it
Yeah.
kind of just as it happens?
Well, there's certain people that I have to take portraits of. So certain, like this kid and this kid, Will and Phil, were the main subjects of the story. So my focus was them, but I had to get portraits of them, which I did. Um, I got portraits of them. They didn't use any of the portraits of them. They end up using these, this, which is, just as powerful as a portrait,
Hmm.
individual portrait of them. But yeah, there is a shot list in my head. I mean, after the first time I went, there's certain things that I had seen that I wanted to work on. So I would work on the same shot again and again in different contexts until I got, I got to that idea. And like, I wanted to get like a portrait of someone where you can see the weight of their life behind their eyes.
Hmm.
And like after, seeing this kid in particular, um, it kind of hit me and helped me realize a lot of what these kids were going through in their lives. I mean, there was the story was about the Arley Warriors who had won their first championship. Is like a Class B high school championship. But in the midst of this, there was a whole string of like mirror suicides that happened. Friends, family, cousins, aunts, uncles. Like a lot of these kids have like lived the most intense lives you could imagine. So after really kind of sitting with them and talking with them and hearing their stories, but also like seeing their eyes, it's an experience that I wanted to mirror through the photographs. So I wanted the weight of the photographs to be obviously heavier, given the subject. This wasn't supposed to be like a really happy shoot by any means. That's a part of the reason they hired me for this. I don't really get light stories. I don't get bubbly stories ever. Like I'm not, there to shoot fashion, or not that fashion's bad. It's just, that's not what I'm being hired for.
Yeah.
So like that's how I respond. That's like a shot list for me. Like I want to be able to get the feeling of these kids and kind of transpose that into what the images look like, and the feeling of the images.
So the other question we have here, I was kind of thinking of, and kind of with the Until Dawn work, I was wondering about this. So the question is, do some of these projects continue as long-term projects that you continue on your own?
Absolutely.
And then kind of the flip side of that question is, do you ever start projects that get picked up, I guess, kind of as stories that run in magazines? Outside, I guess it happened with the boxing thing a little bit, but.
It happened with the boxing thing. Let me minimize this. This story in particular, I'll start with this and go on to another one.
Okay.
This was started with the New York Times. They asked me to go to photograph a Fang Smith named Father Sebastian. And I photographed him in New York City in the back of a Halloween shop. Like basically they cut out closet space for this dude, who is like a messiah to these people. He's like a cult leader. He has like a huge following,
And
30,000 plus.
So Fang Smith, obviously somebody who gives people
makes fangs. Like, yeah, custom makes snap-on fangs, basically. So this guy in particular had been running the New York City scene, the vampire scene, since the 90s. Ran the old Twilight Club. Let me see if I can go down like that. Is this in order? I don't know if this is in order. Anyway, so I shot it for them. It was a 2-day shoot. I shot him in a shop. Then I photographed him doing one of his like vampire soirees at a club in New York City. And it got darker than I expected. And it's something that I was like, oh shit, I'm going to keep running with this. So he's someone I also kept in touch with. I still talk to him every few weeks. We got in touch after the whole COVID thing. And I've been out to New Orleans. I've been out to Vegas photographing this work, because I know that this work is going to go. I think that it's going to develop into a book and an exhibition. I wanted to continue this as much as I could, because this to me is like the boxing work. This is a like thematically consistent body of work about one thing, and I'm not trying to go there strictly as a journalist. I'm trying to go there and make art as much as I can, as much as I think that I'm making. So this is something that like I maintain relationships with people again, and like gotten in touch, and like setting up future shoots with. What was the question?
You answered it. Basically, it was like, do editorial assignments ever turn into long-term projects that you continue on your own?
Yes. So this was one of them, for sure. The other ones is just kind of carving out the time to go back to. But this is, I don't want to say this is the only one, but it may be the only editorial assignment that started as an editorial assignment that I wanted to kind of turn into something else. Revolver magazine picked this up and paid for a trip to Vegas to shoot. and then Rolling Stone um, paid for a shoot to go out to New Orleans, which was
Mhm.
this trip.
I mean, I think
And
that's a really good point, and kind of figuring a way to get editorial work to help push forward a personal project.
oh, absolutely. I mean, that's really important part of um, financing future projects, because trips cost money. I mean, there's no way around it. It's like I started doing the math to go to New Orleans. I was like, I can't afford this. I wanted an assistant, and my buddy said he would do it for free. Um, so I found an Airbnb. I called Sasha. I was like, I have this work. I'd love to, continue doing it and have you guys publish it. And we worked out a budget eventually, and like I went out there for 3 days and just made work that I love to make. And like people were letting me into their lives in a very intimate space, and trusted me um, in a very, like it was a very beautiful kind of unique experience, because letting your guard down and letting someone take your portrait is one thing, but like being in like a BDSM or like one of these kinds of situations and like showing your face is really kind of letting someone into your world. And I didn't want to shoot this work, in any exploitative way. I
Hmm.
wanted to show what my kind of understanding of um, this kinky kind of vampire world was, and um, it was just very beautiful to shoot. And like I got to get creative with certain situations, and people were just down. Like they were really fucking cool, and it just made it so much easier. Like I was in a hotel room with her and two of her friends, and like we met during the day and we talked for a while. I told them what I was doing. I think a lot of going into um, editorial work and like going into these subcultures and these situations with people is being truthful about your intentions, being clear about what you're wanting to do, and kind of show them what your work is and what it's about. I think it's really a necessary thing to do, actually. It's like if you ever happen to have, your work accessible on hand, whether it's on your iPhone or whatever, a book, like if you're ever going into a situation and you feel that people may be, questionable about your intentions, you show them what you do. And if they see the truth in it, and if they see that, you're not there to be, to make them look like assholes, I think a lot of people will take you in.
Yeah. Um,
Uh,
how has the Until Dawn project kind of changed as you've worked on it? Because one thing we're working on long-term projects, and I think one
yeah.
thing happens that I don't think students or any photographer necessarily anticipates is that a project will change or how it will change as you're working on it.
Um, you want to get, how do I explain this? I saw the potential for this after the first night out at the club. Like this was shot at the Fang shop. I knew there was certain images that I wanted to get with portraiture, but as soon as I went to the first club night, I realized that this is like not it's not only a scene. It's not only like, this is like a real subculture. There's people that live this way 90% of their lives, and I didn't get to the point where I'm with these people at their day jobs,
Hmm.
but I saw the potential of, this could have been really kitschy and fucking lame, this body of work, if
Hmm.
shot differently. I feel like I gave it the voice it deserved. I feel like their sentimentality about this culture, it's somewhat goth, but it is vampire, and there's all these subsets of, BDSM and bondage and like kink and all of that, and spirituality and mysticism. And I saw all of those things, and I wanted to really relay that in the work.
Hmm.
So there's seances, like this one was from the first night. They're all doing like a group prayer for like an energy prayer or whatever. And I didn't want it to make it look cheesy, because this is one of those situations that people are like, they're fucking vampires, like, really? And it's like, you can take that and be exploitative, and that's not what I wanted to do. I really wanted to get to this and feel this out as it is like their own religion.
Hmm.
And I wanted to make that, I wanted to make those ideas come across.
Hmm. I have a kind of technical working question here. Like in this shot, you're in the previous shot, you're using a flash during a seance or ceremony. Like, how do
I
your subjects react to that, I guess? Do you feel like it interrupts the flow of what's happening, or it calls too much attention to you, or it's something that comes up with students a lot. I think they're
Yeah.
afraid to do it.
The first time I felt weird about using it. This is the first night. I didn't really know him that well. I didn't know the people that well. I was an outsider coming in. It's an all black requirement, so head to toe I was dressed in black, but like I obviously wasn't one of them.
Hmm.
Um, so I was a little apprehensive about really doing it a lot, but I had spoken to Sebastian. I was like, this is, it's a dark scene. It's pure darkness. I need to be able to get something out of this. So I did it sparingly. The second one, I kind of went in, and I talked to him before the seance. Not that one. I talked to him before the seance, and I told him I needed to use a flash because it was too dark. And I asked the people around me, because this is very meaningful for them. This is actually, their religion, their spirituality, their mysticism. And I asked them, I was like, guys, I need to use flash in order to kind of make this kind of come out. And this is in a place where I'm not going there as a documentarian. I'm not going there with strict ethical policies, just shoot and don't talk to anyone. This is my experiment. This is my work that I needed to develop. So I told them that I needed to do that. And again, it's like I wasn't blowing the place up with flash.
Right.
I was using it sparingly. I was being decisive about the moments that I wanted to take it and using it. I think certain places, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't. I'm seeing a lot of work, COVID related work in certain places where I'm like, I couldn't use flash in that kind of situation. Not only because not to draw attention to myself, but because I feel that it's disrespectful and it's going more for yourself than it is for the sake of the people that are being documented. The vision of it all is more for your own sake than so that to me, it's like certain places I'll use it, certain places I won't. I discriminate those places, and I choose where it's okay and where it's not okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So speaking of COVID work, what have you been shooting now, and have you been getting any assignments?
Yes. Surprisingly, almost as often as when I was in New York. Right now I'm in Jersey. I'm at my folks' summer house in South Jersey, and I've been here almost 2 months. I would say I'd been getting an assignment or two a week. And I had a long-term assignment for New York Times on theologians and philosophers and their ideas on death. So I had like a whole, I had about 9 more locations across the US to go to photograph these individuals. That turned to shit after COVID hit. And I worked out something with one of my editors where I photograph through the phone, but I have a process behind it where this is kind of between us, but where whoever's with the person, I direct them. So wherever the camera is, I direct where the camera is. I go through their homes with them. I seat them where I think is appropriate, where there's nice light. And basically they're my, I feel like Krang from like the Ninja Turtles, where I'm like the brain in the stomach and they're my body. I think that's a generational thing. And I guide them as much as possible, even in terms of exposure and distance and body language, and it's the only thing that I can do while I'm away. So I've been doing that with a bit of work. I did a 3-day shoot in Atlantic City, which is a big casino town, which is kind of um, died out the past few years.
Hmm.
And now COVID hit, and there's absolutely no, like, thousands and thousands of people are laid off from their jobs. All the casinos are shut down. So I did a bit of reportage there, as much as I could. And my editor, I pitched the idea to him. I sent him um, about 15 images of what I had been shooting in Atlantic City,
Hmm.
and he was like, "Let's do it, 3 days." And I went there, and my wife was my assistant, and we shot around Atlantic City, and it's going to come out sometime this week. I could probably show it to you guys.
What magazine or what's that going to be in?
New York Times. Let's see. Let me download this real quick. And organization. I don't know how many of you guys are shooting film. Are any of you shooting film?
I don't think anybody is.
Raise
Or
a hand.
yeah.
Okay. Um, yes, you need to archive and make contact sheets and write down everything on the back of the contact sheets and keep it in order. Because once years pass, I have folders, binders and binders. And I remember when I was getting a lot of image requests, this is before digital, I would spend about 6 or 7 hours looking through these books of fucking negatives and not being able to find anything, like holding, like, one sheet up to the light, another sheet up to the light. And it really, really helps finding, being fastidious and setting a tone for your organization. It's really important to do that. Mark, I don't know how you organize your negatives.
I'm very well organized. I organize mine by date. Just
Hmm.
everything is sequential by when I shot it.
Yeah.
And so I haven't made a contact sheet in about 12 years, but I'll show you.
Yeah.
So everything's sequential, and at the top of the negative sleeve, it's what it is, when it was shot, and it's all numbered sequentially. So when I scan a negative, it is the sheet of the negative and then the frame number.
Okay.
So in this one, it would be, SF Street _ 2747.36.
2747, meaning
That's the negative number. That's the sheet of the negative there.
2000 something.
Yeah, I'm up to almost 3,000 sheets of negative.
Wow. Okay.
So that's kind of my system.
Yeah.
All that gets thrown into thrown to shit with color and with shooting slides.
Of course.
But I have a question here that maybe you can help answer, and that is kind of understanding the difference between reportage and documentary and photojournalism and just kind of editorial work. Like, is there a difference between all of that?
I feel with European agencies, the term reportage has a bit more depth to it in terms of, maybe it is the same thing. I don't know. I feel like reportage has a feeling behind it, a visual like distinction compared to other stuff. Editorial, I feel, is just general magazine work. But reportage for me, like, I always felt like the whole Magnum, agency. I think of all the black and white photographers for them, and the way that they would go into situations, whether it's war, famine, whatever, and like come back with a body of work. For me, it felt like reportage, whereas like an editorial body was kind of seemingly shorter in time and context, and just more condensed. And reportage just feels like it's an overarching, long-term kind of way of working. And editorial just feels like gigs, like a job, one job to the next.
that's kind of how I would describe it also, sort of as reportage and documentary both kind of, it's a matter of how much time you have to work on something, I feel like.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
reportage versus documentary is kind of, you know, a shorter time than documentary, but more time than photojournalism or editorial work. Where
Yeah.
like Devin was saying, so if you get an editorial job, editorial work would be like, hey, Devin, go shoot Broadway today,
Yeah.
versus, you know, go spend 2 or 3 days with this group of vampires, versus Devin spending a few years with the vampires as a larger documentary project.
Yeah. Absolutely. I could show you guys this. I think it's coming out this week, hopefully. This is a few days in Atlantic City, um, just documenting how it's become desolate and people are out of work. And this was great because this is me wandering. This is kind of my diaristic approach. I didn't really go in with any intentions apart from getting, you know, the outside of closed casinos and, you know, the streets surrounding. Um, but this is just literally just driving around and finding what it is you're attracted to and kind of honing in on that and spending time with certain landscapes. I mean, there weren't too many people out, so I didn't really, um, you know, have time to talk and like really develop any portraiture out of it. But just to give the sense of a city that's, you know, hit such an economic collapse, and you know, 90% of this city's income is from the casinos, and now that they're closed, you know, I don't know how many thousands of people are out of work right now. So, you know, given that, it's me kind of telling my version of what this looks like. I mean, they could hire anyone to do anything with this, and it's, you know, it's going to look different with every photographer's approach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, this is my impression of Atlantic City and what it felt like, you know, with no one around.
Do you know how many pictures they're using from this?
um, I think 11.
Yeah. We were talking about editing the other day in class, and I was showing them kind of the wide edit that Danny Wilcox Frazier sent me
Mhm.
from the Black Hills work versus, you know, the 10 pictures maybe that we ran from it. And,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah, he's great.
yeah.
He's really, he's something else.
Uh,
um,
I have
but
another quick question here, kind of
yeah,
process again. Do you use a tripod at all when you're out shooting?
I try to be as hands-free as possible. Tripod, I don't remember the last time I used a tripod. I think it was for the long exposure work. But besides that, I mean, it's all like in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Try to carry as little as possible. You know, I'll carry a light stand for, you know, external light, but that's about it. That's the only three-legged, you know, appendage. I wanted to show you this.
Mm-hmm.
In the midst of not having as much work as I'd like to, I realized that I've never had this pure um, kind of, how do I how do I term this? It's like I've never been with family so much of the time, and it's been one of the most beautiful things I've ever been able to experience. I have a almost 2-year-old son, and my wife and my mom are all in one house together, and I realized that this immediacy, like having a camera here and being able to pick it up and capture any moment, I've never really had that liberty or that kind of time to do anything. So I recognize that, and in such a scary time in all of our lives, like even if you're safe at home, there's always kind of this wavering, kind of ominous worry about the future and what's going to happen and when will life get back to normal and everything. And I just I've been shooting home a lot, and I've been shooting my surroundings and trying to get in touch with, you know, those feelings through, you know, through the photographs. um, and this is, you know, just kind of my approach that I've been trying to pitch to magazines lately. How do I just do a full screen of this? um Control full screen. Bring that down. So this is, you know, the past since March 16th basically. work that I've been doing of my wife and my mother and my son, um, just day in, day out. Like when the moment strikes, trying to find, the same sense of intimacy with, the people that I love most, and like keeping in tune with my sensibilities as an artist and still documenting the world around me. I've been offered a lot of COVID work that I had to turn down. New York Times Magazine wanted me to do some hospital work, and I couldn't do it. And Vanity Fair and New Yorker wanted me to also um, go to these funeral homes that are just in Brooklyn and Queens that are just inundated with dead bodies. And as much as I would like to be a part of this journalistic experience, I can't, because I am now with my 74-year-old mother and my son and my wife, and I can't, take any chances of bringing back home anything. And if I were to go to New York, which is where I'm based, I'd have to quarantine for at least 2 weeks before I, do anything and come back. And, a part of me is regretful because I feel like this is, obviously very historical, especially with um, this medium. Like people are making really important work and showing the world of how fucked up everything actually is, like how real this all is. And this is a portrait of my wife, thinking about, this is kind of in the beginning, this is like early March, or mid-March rather, and like, you know her thinking about when the fuck is everything going to go back to normal, are we okay, are we safe, all of that. um and I regret not being a part of this as a journalist, in the media sense, like not being able to like put forth really important you know journalism of what's actually going on right now. Because I know if like I went to these places to shoot, like I would come back with work that I was proud of. And as harrowing as all this stuff is, I know that I would make really good work. And I feel left out of that all, which is a part of my struggle, in terms of what I'm going through right now. um I mean, I could go to New York and just stay there away from my family, but I want to be here. I want to be with my son. I want to be with my wife. I want to be with my mother. And that to me, I guess in the end, is more important than making work that could potentially get me sick. I mean, I feel like I may have had it in early March. I had a shoot at Gleason's gym, which is a boxing gym in Brooklyn. And then I had a shoot at the New York Stock Exchange the day after. And after that, I was out of commission for like 9 days. Like couldn't move. Um, I was in bed with fever, aches, tight chest, all of that, and it knocked me out. And I realized like anyone is susceptible to this. Like I also have asthma, but it's like related to cats. But it's like if I go into the situation, like even if I'm like really, if I mitigate safety and be really fastidious about like PPE and proper gear, like there's always a chance of getting it. And like why is it worth it? Like I'm not one of those journalists that are out there to do that. Like I'd rather make my own work in the end and like be with family and being I'm not a single guy in my 20s that can go out with nothing to lose, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm huh
This works amazing.
thank you. Thank you. And I'm just trying to keep busy. I'm trying to keep myself inspired. I'm like, experimenting when I can, trying to get the day in, days out of this whole experience. And where I am in Jersey, it's like it's a small island off of Atlantic City, and there's nothing going on here. There's literally nothing happening here. So it's up to me to just kind of go around and take my life, and like, keep it in perspective and work the way I would generally work on my own work, and you know, just try to keep things real.
Yeah.
And this work I'm currently trying to pitch um, to a few different magazines. I don't know if anyone's interested, and I don't know if Mother Jones is interested in it, but it's I don't know, it's work that I feel that it's like been really personal for me, and it's work that compared to um, Nemesis, which is I don't know if that's going to be the name of the work, but that work is personal to me, but family is just way more personal, and finding kind of the sentimentality within your surroundings and being in touch. Like this work is also personal to me, but not the way the work I just showed you is.
Yeah. And I think that comes through for sure.
So yeah, a part of my process, from, you know, not having a lot of work coming my way is showing what my experience and showing the importance of non-COVID related photography, you know, what photographers are doing in isolation, and showing that, you know, artistry can still kind of come through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important to just always be working, you know, like, I don't know how many of you just have like a camera in your pocket or within arm's reach, but I try to, you know, my camera are basically my keys in my wallet. Anytime I leave home, like I do the pat, you know, the chest pat is like the camera pat, and the keys in the wallet, obviously. Yeah.
Yep.
So that to me is just as integral as, you know, anything else in my life. And being able to kind of make work with the immediacy of your surroundings at all times is really important, because it's not all about just going to like an editorial shoot. It's not about like having one specific place to go to and photograph there. I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, it's the journey to get there, because you see all the shit on the way. And if you're focused on what's at the end, you're not seeing, you know, your periphery. And
Yep.
it's really important to discover your periphery and stray off the road. And like, if something's on the right of your eyes, you make that right, and you go until like you figure out what it is you're after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, you know, looking at the work you've been making now, and kind of getting to this idea of how, or I was going to ask how, you know, just having a camera with you at all times and making the personal work informs the editorial work that you're doing.
Always. Yes, it needs to, and that's how you get hired.
Yep.
I did last March, I did the music issue for New York Times Magazine. And I had one meeting before that, just because it was the whole issue. And I met with Kathy Ryan and my editor, David Karthus, and there was like a mood board, which I'd never, you know, mood boards, I've never seen one before in my life. Like, I like the idea of it. I don't conceptualize life that way. I don't, you know, that's not my thing, but I understood what it is they wanted. They wanted me to shoot it, but they also wanted certain ideas to come across with certain musicians. So that's Meek Mill, that's Casey Musgraves, who's also a part of it. Another Casey Musgraves, Tierra Whack. Robin should be in here somewhere, but she's not. I have to put her in there. But these are portraits that I've been hired to shoot because of my aesthetic. And my personal work, my vision has informed my editorial work, as we were talking about. And this is another thing, when I get hired for portraiture, they don't tell me what to do. It's just like, I go, I try to make a motive work and come back with it, basically. And this is just, you know, between New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, and a few others, some personal work. But yeah, color's coming through eventually, because certain pieces kind of require color.
That's so good.
this is I feel like, especially after he kind of resigned, it weighs all the more.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, I don't know, it's, for me, this is kind of a more historical photograph. um, I do want to show you another assignment work. I'm going to try to find it. um, but yeah, this is like what I'm being hired for mostly now.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think 90% of my work as of lately has been portraiture, hasn't been so much reportage,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm very happy about. Like I love, it's something that I used to resent, and it scared me more than anything because I didn't know how to use a light. A lot of this is lit, and a lot of it's actually completely just natural light, and just camera in hand, point and shoot camera, and mirroring kind of the expression of whoever I'm photographing. This is William Kentridge, who's a famous painter, and this was shot for the Times. And he was just such an intense dude, and like made me very nervous. But like I was there to have, I had to compose myself and um, kind of get his intensity and his gaze, and I wanted to get that through. And like what I needed to do is just get really close to him and be in his environment as much as he was in mine, and break a physical boundary. And like certain photos I have of him, like I'm like 3 inches away from his eyes with my camera. And because I was there with like my intentions, like he didn't second guess it. He was an artist that understood it, and let me do that. This is Hunter Schafer, who is blowing up. She's so wonderful. I don't know if you guys have seen Euphoria, but it's a really intense show, and she's one of the main stars. Um, it's Misty Copeland, ballerina. This is for the music issue as well. That's Orville Peck. James Blake. So yeah, I mean, eventually, like the vision kind of, your vision will end up serving you in a way that you'll end up shooting things that you didn't anticipate. 3 years ago, I wasn't shooting portraits.
Right.
Like nothing. Like no one would. I mean, I would get little portraits here and there, but of like chefs and other things. But the politicians and the musicians have been coming out the past like 2 or 3 years, and it's nothing that I anticipated. But I'm obviously very happy to be shooting it.
Mm-hmm.
Just going to show you one body of work. See, nope, not that. Track. Race. Yes. Download that real quick. Should happen quickly. In the meantime, I'm going to show you one or two more bodies. Underground wrestling, I was hired for a look. This was hired because of my boxing work, and one of my friends who's an editor at the New York Times, gives me everything that she knows that will be natural for me. Mm-hmm. So this is 2 days shooting underground wrestling, all across New York, from the Bronx to South Brooklyn, and it was a chance to like have fun and experiment. And like again, it's like documenting a subculture that could be exploitative, but I'm documenting with the intensity that I feel is in the air. So I go with my lights. I get in people's faces. I try to be respectful of their space, but also kind of this dude's in everyone's face. Like I want to be in his face as well. So it's just it's about going with your natural intentions and kind of showing it and showing what this atmosphere is. And it's fun work to make. Honestly, it's like to be given the opportunity to just walk into other people's lives and just make work, like literally look around, figure out what your curiosities are, and point your camera in that direction, and to be able to shoot that is such a fortunate experience. I love this one. Let me see if this is okay. So this is downloaded. This is an example of editorial reportage. I consider this reportage. This is like a few days of work. And this is dirt track racing in rural Pennsylvania. And this was another experience where I got to meet Tony Stewart, who's a famous NASCAR driver, and he's retired, but he owns a bunch of teams, and he also owns his own dirt racing track out in Pennsylvania. So I got to go and photograph this culture that I had no idea about at all. I'm from New York City and born and raised in Manhattan, and like this is a part of America that I've never seen before. And it was really great to have these people kind of take me in. I mean, granted, I wasn't on a personal basis the same way I was with the basketball team or the Marine, but I got to go to these places and just make sense of their life in the way that I could. Mm-hmm. I wasn't prepared for what dirt track racing was, and just was covered in shit after every shoot. I didn't realize how wet and dirty it was actually going to be, and I don't think I was prepared with my camera. I mean, if you see the flash, you could see that's the air, and without the flash, that would be pure darkness. So imagine just like coughing up dirt afterwards. Basically, it was really intense. But yeah, people like watching cars go in circles, and I didn't think that I was going to be into it, but there's a whole system to it, and with the NASCAR work especially, like I snuck up onto one of the tiers where I'll show you those photos in a second, where all these the teams had these guys who were the lookouts who would anticipate cars' movements and tell their drivers, and they were connected to the people who were on the roofs of these buildings. And that was fascinating to me because there was like a science behind it. I initially thought, I was like, all right, great. They're going around a fucking circle 200 times in a row. And once I saw that, I was like, there was clarity to it. There was like, this is a real sport. This is a real thing. Let me see if I could find those. Oh, there's a lot of these. I don't want to have to go through all of these with you guys. Where is the... Here it is. And this is the NASCAR. And this was great to shoot too, because this was like, I don't know, this was like a real sport, and the intensity, it was just as intense as the dirt track, but like this was in Indianapolis. Yeah. And this was great too, because this is a part of America that, like, as a New Yorker, you don't see ever.
Racing's really fun to shoot.
Yeah, it was so much fun to shoot. So these are the lookout guys. So they have their headsets, and they're anticipating talking to the other drivers, and this is just like one day here and one day at the other place, and they're long full days, and they send me out to just get the actual, the feeling of it all, or what I perceive the feeling to be. And I tried to be as true to the situation as possible, because this story kind of required it. Yeah, I don't know how much there's more, but it's kind of repetition kind of stuff, getting the same shot over and over again until you really got it. And
Great.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions? Any more questions for Devin? Or Um, this is a good one. So is there any body of work you're looking forward to resuming or looking forward to doing after the COVID stuff?
Vampire work. I have 2 or 3 more shoots that I want to do that before I put a book together. One girl who is in, did I not show you anything of this? This girl, where is she? She should be here. Her is from New York, born and raised. Very, very odd. When I was there with her, she asked Father Sebastian if the teeth were good for bloodletting. I was like, oh shit, this is real. Like it went from like kitschy subculture to like, this woman is about to go somewhere and like bite someone's neck, like, and draw blood. So I did keep in touch with her. And we were trying to organize a shoot at some point. And I have ideas for the shoot, where I want to do it. And COVID just kind of shut down everything, huh?
Yeah.
So as soon as this stuff, gets back to normal, I'm going to start resuming this body of work. And then my other personal body of work that was Nemesis, I want to start doing. I mean, that I can continue shooting now and slowly putting together. But I've been down here for almost 2 months now. I've been away from my studio. I have all my prints at my studio. But when I do go back to New York, I'm going to get my small printer, which prints 5x7s, which if you're not making prints in the darkroom or have access, I would highly recommend getting like a small, like under $200 printer that makes 4x6s and 5x7s and print out your work. Find your favorites, obviously, but over time, print the small ones out, put them on a wall, put them on the floor, and have that physical relationship with your work. Because those that are shooting digital are not having any of that relationship. You go outside or go wherever you shoot, then you come home, and then you're staring at a screen. With film, I don't know if you're processing your own film, but there is that artistry to it. There's still that physicality. But even then, after you scan them, they're on the screen. So you're working the same way. But when you have the prints, you have the option of like narrating and rearranging and like putting up on a wall and like seeing what the story is and seeing the overarching theme. You're seeing your tonal ranges. You're seeing like the context of your photos. You could tell an interesting photo by its thumbnail even when looking at them.
Kind of related to that, Devin, another good question here. And that's kind of thinking about making a book. Does the book format change the way you shoot or you approach the work?
No, never. For me personally.
So follow up that I have to that is, how does it change how you edit the work or how you're looking at the work when you make the prints?
I mentioned before that like there's certain circumstances that I see. Mm-hmm. And they stick with me, and I go to photograph over and over again until I feel that I've completed the idea that I was destined to shoot. Mm-hmm. With like the NASCAR racing, the tire changing, like it happened over and over again. I shot the same situation over and over again until I got what I thought was going to be the truest image of what my intentions were. This girl with fangs, like the same thing. Like there's certain people that I shot over and over again. There's certain ideas that resonated with me that whether or not they're the same person or the same scenario, they stayed with me, and it was something that I wanted to reapproach and make sure that I can find closure in that image. And once I do find that closure, I feel like I can move on. So with editing, I find that there's certain, when you look at a whole body of work, you're going to see a lot of redundancies. You're going to see that you were looking at and approaching the same thing over and over again, just with different scenes and different people. And when you see the thumbnail, when you see the image and the context of the image and the people in relation to one another, and when you see that with clarity, you can identify which is the best version of that photograph, regardless of if they're different. You'll see the best version of that photograph, and that will stick out, and that's the one that you put on the wall. And then with that, you add certain images to kind of narrate your story and add, there's fillers, there's the bangers, there's ways of sequencing, as if it's like a musical sequence, or notations, or you could treat it like a haiku or whatever. There's any way you want to edit a body of work, you do it, but you want to keep out the weakest links, and you want to sequence the images that kind of speak to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a gallery wall, like a salon style show or a book, I think sequencing is so integral to the approach and to the projects, that it's so important to do that. Yeah.
I'm kind of the mind that editing is as important, if not ultimately kind of more important to shooting and presenting work, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What else can I show you guys? Oh, I could show you this, just because it's when you talk about voice and you talk about vision, you can see kind of with a what do you call it? The overarching theme and consistency in voice and style. There's certain things that when you look at thumbnails, like, you want to make sure everything, if you want to harness your vision and keep things consistent, you want to make sure tonally a certain body of work is all related. Like, this obviously sticks out because it's color,
Mm-hmm.
but like, you want to make sure that all of these things are relative to one another, because the more they are, the more clarity you have in your vision, and the more clarity you have in your vision, the more intentionally you go out and shoot.
You'll get.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of it is like, there is a lot of post involved, but that being said, the mood is always still there, and the mood is as integral as the context and who you're shooting. Like, you could make an incredibly touching portrait from anyone's face, like even the most like vanilla, just nondescript person out there. You could like find, once a guard is lowered, and once you've found a commonality, but not necessarily like a proper notion of commonality, but like, when you look at someone in their eyes, you can look and you make eye contact, but then there's the next 5 seconds and a deeper level of engagement. And I feel if you spend time with people and like really look and listen and are like fully there, like, you can realize that there's so much more like behind the eyes, and there's a deeper connection that kind of clicks. And whether or not it's understandable, like whether or not you can actually conceptualize and like understand what you're seeing, and I don't know if I'm making sense, but like, it might not be clear just then as it's happening, but that you've entered a deeper level of engagement with someone just based on looking.
Yep.
Like, it might get awkward for a second, and that moment of awkwardness is the connection. Like, for me, it's like, once you've both are like, oh shit, we're both here, that to me is a click in both parties. And a lot of people avoid that. A lot of people will put their guard up immediately after that. But I feel once you get past that, portraits start to become much, much deeper and resonate much farther.
Yep.
Personally.
It's
Because a lot of people will give you the look that they want to give you.
Right.
Because a lot of what we show through our eyes is how we want to be perceived to the world.
Right.
People want to look confident. People want to look sexy, whatever. But I feel like when people let their guards down, there's so much more to be captured. And I don't want to use captured in like the hunting sense, but like more in the all-encompassing, like, you feel like you've mirrored someone's experience, and you've been able to like kind of um, show show truth in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that anything here that I think I've showed you. I showed you that. 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 Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I showed you guys most of.
Any other questions for Devin? I could talk to him all day, but I'm gonna probably wrap this up pretty soon.
Okay. Any questions about industry and meetings, or how to go about, attaining, like if there's a magazine you like, how you approach them, anything like that? Or what kind of work do you guys do? Actually, can we, if you're not too busy, just, a quick
Yeah.
conversation with each of you,
Yeah. I mean,
like what your intentions are, like how far into photography, what kind of photography?
yeah. Speak up, everybody. I mean, it's an excellent chance to. I mean, I having an inside to a magazine like the New York Times Magazine, and the New Yorker and those sort of things are really exceptionally valuable. I mean, those are
Yeah.
some of the places running the best photography today.
Yeah.
And it's I can't understate or I can't overstate how important it is to have those kind of things. No, nobody.
No, it's okay.
I mean,
can I ask you what kind of work you guys do? Anyone?
I'll talk about mine.
Yeah, please.
Thanks for the session. It was great. Lots of
Thank you.
super insightful comments, and the personal work you're doing in around COVID is also pretty neat because it keeps you kind of busy, and I found that inspiring. So I'm working on two different things right now. One is a series on the print newspaper industry.
Okay.
And how that kind of is fading away a little bit over time. Last semester I went to a printing plant and spent time there with the workers that actually print the papers. And this one, I'm doing a little bit kind of newspaper boxes on the street. They're a little bit like payphones. They're colorful, but they're fading away. So that's one project. And the other one, both are documentary. And the other one is people that are living in RVs as their living space around Stanford campus.
Okay.
So you have the Bay Area booming and a lot of tech companies emerging, and then you have a lot of people right around it that live in an RV with their kids. And I've been going around. Both got a little sidetracked with the COVID, where I've avoided people and interrupting them and all that, but still can go outside and a little bit like your Atlantic City, documenting what's going on around. That's what I'm working on right now.
Okay. And when you were photographing the RVs, like before the whole COVID thing, were you going in them and photographing families in their surroundings, or was it more kind of a topographical?
More topographical. The next step was to go to the families, and that's right when COVID hit. I was about to go out and like start talking to people, and then I realized it better wait a little bit and come back when things pass.
Yeah. And in terms of getting in touch with these people, have you like planted seeds as far as like what you would like to do when things calm down, so you could like kind of keep connected?
Yeah. So through the newspaper assignment, I've been able to get a lot of like leads and contacts from even the local reporters who've covered stories in the area in the past. So yes, I've planted them, and now I just have to hope they don't leave, because a lot of them are leaving with the crisis. But
yeah. And stylistically, how are you approaching this? I mean, I guess you said the new stuff, the boxes were color.
Yeah, so the boxes, I prefer black and white, and the printing plant was all black and white, and I thought that captured a little bit the grittiness of the plant. But the boxes are so colorful, and they're so different, and many times they're around like certain urban features, buildings, or other things that have color, that I decided to experiment, and I'm using this semester kind of like as an experimentation with color boxes.
Okay, and are you mixing the two as well? Have you like wanted to shoot some black and white of the project and then some in color?
I haven't yet. That's a good point. It's all digital, so it could easily migrate to black and white. But now it's been all color, just to be like focused and consistent. But I could for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there shouldn't. As I mentioned before, it's like once you impose rules and restrictions on your work, it cuts the creative flow. I mean, people generally like seeing consistency, but it's always worth experimenting
That's
with
a good
both.
point. Thank you. I'll think of that.
Well, how about Savannah and Justin?
Anybody else?
You can go first, Justin, if you want.
I was working on this guy, Terry Spence, Dr. Terry Spence, who's a naturopathic doctor, and he has relatively, not unknown, but it's not as popular treatment that it's basically kind of a similar to a chiropractic neck stretch, and it resets a lot of maladies in the body. He works with a lot of athletes and fighters and just normal people. I did it to my mom, but he's based in Kansas and in Vegas. So with everything shut down, I went up here to Oregon, and I'm on a fish hatchery that's run by the Department of the Interior. And so I was just documenting the life cycle of the annual fish, the salmon growing season.
And how are you doing that?
I live on one of the houses here on the fishery with one of the guys. It's a friend of a friend. And so most of the days, I've been doing some volunteer work as well. So I'll just head out and shoot whatever I see.
Yeah.
It's pretty monotonous process. Nothing's changing daily.
Do you have an underwater camera?
Actually, I do. I think it's old, maybe 10 years, but I can find it.
I mean, if it still works.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Gee, thank you.
Yeah, Justin's work's good. I mean, he's really digging into the process of the hatchery, kind of getting the ins and outs of it.
Okay.
Which is cool. I mean, I guess since he's living there, it makes it easy.
Yeah. Send me links if you can.
Yeah, there's nothing online right now, but I'll grab your info.
Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned this to another class I spoke to. It's like there's a lot of downtime now. Like I love editing people's work. If you guys feel like you have a growing body of work, I would love to look at it. Like I asked Mark to send me like a whole folder of JPEGs to go through. And I do, honestly, I love spending time with people's work and kind of seeing their vision and helping, if I find that, I like to show what my sensibility is of the work with narration and sequence. And like, I like to, if I feel like I have some clarity of the work, I try to help as much as I can. So if you guys have anything you're working on, please, honestly, email me. Feel free.
Is that a common thing that a lot of people do, is to edit, or is that just during this time because there's so much downtime?
I think it's because there's so much downtime, but I like doing it in general. Like I help my friends all the time with that. Yeah, I have no problem. I mean, I like seeing what people are doing. So it's like, and plus it's inspiring too, because you're seeing everyone's eyes. You're seeing how everyone is perceiving the world. And if it helps you think differently all the time. I mean, we see other people's work all the time, but we don't see process. And process is just as important as, the final product.
I mean, yeah, Devin, asked me for those JPEGs. I showed you guys some of that work, and that was pre-COVID. He took the time to wade through almost 500 images.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of having prints, this is kind of the result of that process. Pinning those images up in the sequence to see how it feels.
Yeah. And that's so important. I mean, I can't harp on that enough, you guys. Like physicality and finding the artistry and like rearranging and sequencing and narrating will really help you tell your story. Because, if you don't narrate and you just put them on the screen, you could have 5 images, the first 5 images that just don't speak to one another at all. And you won't see that because you're not seeing the overall.
Yep.
And Savannah, what kind of work do you do?
Yeah, so I originally, for this class, I was doing a portrait project at the airport. um, like right when COVID hit. I was going to SFO a lot and the Oakland airport, and then that became too unsafe. So for a couple reasons, I came back to the East Coast, and I was gonna go like drive back, couldn't, and I was gonna shoot gas stations along the way.
Mm.
And instead, I can't do that now, so I'm just doing like pretty old East Coast gas stations.
Okay.
But my passion's definitely like in travel photography and like unknown communities and things that are abandoned for sure. But yeah, so last class we narrowed down a lot of just the pictures that don't necessarily fit in as well with the series and times of day.
Mm.
So I
And are
think
you shooting it all on film? Are you shooting it on film?
I shoot digital and I have a point and shoot. So whenever I go, I just do both, and then I'm sending in the point and shoot stuff now to like darkroom.com, and then
Okay.
they'll send it by.
Oh, okay. That's good to know about. It's film processing that you
Pretty
just.
cheap.
Okay. And with work you want to be doing in the future, like, it's always weird hearing that where do you see yourself thing, but like, what do you intend on doing with photography? Is it something that you want to do for your life?
Yeah. I've shot commercially for like the past couple years too,
Mm.
and for different brands.
Okay.
And I've kind of like, especially when I was in school, just sort of part-time work. And then I worked in like the human rights industry for a year. So that just automatically got me more into documentary stuff. And that's definitely where my passion lies more.
Great.
So yeah, that's where I would like to be.
And if you wanted to do editorial or magazine, like where do you see your work fitting?
I think it's too soon to say.
Mm.
This class has really inspired me a lot in a lot of ways. Yeah, I love portraits. So I've actually been shooting. I did like a socially distant shoot the other day.
Mm.
So
How did you find that process?
it was exhilarating to be with people. Yeah, that was like about an hour away. I was at this place called Sandy Spring Friends School. That kind of was like this built-in community, and it has its own forest in the back. So I really like the idea of making use of the space that you have. And I think sometimes I think like really big, and there's so much stimulation. So a amazing benefit of the quarantine is just isolating your ideas and sort of like the project you did with your family. You know, it's like you can make something look so concrete and cohesive with very little.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting better at.
Good. It's we're visual athletes, I guess. It's something that we have to exercise every day as much as we can, because when we don't, we just get rusty.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
like I'm afraid for my next like actual physical editorial like job, because I mean the one I did in Atlantic City is one thing, but it's like it probably won't be another. I don't know when I will be out in public shooting again, but you get rusty. Like it's really hard. That's why you have to be, practicing. I don't know if you guys work with lights or anything, but this is the time to experiment. This is the time to get as creative, not, don't feel bad if you're not, but if you do have the inspiration to do it, just fuck around. Just like really get as creative as you can, and like no rules. And you don't have to go out with intention either. Like literally just take a camera, take a light, if you're quarantining with anyone, just like make pictures of them and just get better at the craft while we're all away from everything. Oh, Mark, you're on mute.
One of my students here, Leo, really kind of, he's just basically in his apartment, but really kind of made some cool photos, just like of just shit around his house. It was really good.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, Gene here in his car, he's been working on this project on kind of the railroad for a long time. That's really good. And kind of through editing, this last class had this really good breakthrough on his project. Really, really nice about kind of traveling via rail by yourself.
Okay.
It was cool.
That brings, is it Mike Brody?
Yep.
You remember that work?
Yep.
Um,
Green hoppers.
Yeah.
Yep.
What do you call it? I forget what I was gonna say. Yeah, I don't know. We're in a strange place, but I guess we're all very fortunate to be safe and to have like a good surroundings and to be able to engage in this. I mean, this is a luxury.
Yep.
Like there's places where people aren't able to do this, and I don't know. We count our blessings.
So we're hitting about the 2-hour mark, which is, it's been awesome. But I'm gonna let Devin go, unless anybody else has any questions or want to talk to him about your work or anything. Okay.
Devin, if we wanted to send you some of a body of work and you had mentioned if you have time, you could go through and do some edits.
I would love to.
How would we go about doing that?
Mark will give you my email address, and you could just email it to me. Send a WeTransfer link. Throw a bunch of JPEGs in there, and hopefully I'll get back to you guys before unemployment gets back to us. That whole process.
Sure.
Expect a little time, just because I have a family here. But I will look and I will spend time with it. I do really enjoy it, and like if I find that there is redundance or certain things aren't coming out, like I feel like you could be saying some more about a certain aspect of the story, like I'm going to try my best to kind of give you that insight.
Right on. As Mark mentioned, I've been doing a rail project. It's actually spanned over the course of several years. And I've just recently, I've been a photographer all my life, but not to the extent I am now, not professionally and not as seriously. Over the past, since 2017, actually, just really committed myself to the idea of being a photographer, and haven't really even called myself a photographer, just kind of been acting like a photographer. But I've been a nomad for a long time, so that's really where my documentary photography dovetails with my life. Is I haven't stayed in any one place for more than 3 years, and even now it's even shorter. So just to give you an idea. But anyways, I would take you up on that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go off what you just said, I feel like, I mean, I keep talking about Anders Peterson because he's really one of my main inspirations. I feel with work, the work is only as interesting as your life is. If you're not going out to seek certain things that inspire you, or I mean, like, I feel like still lifes can only take you to a certain place. But I mean, if you're living the life first and photographing second, I think that's really important for the whole process, because I don't know, life is more important than photography. And if you're at home doing nothing, you're not going to have much work to show. But if you're going out and experiencing life with other people, or you're on the road or whatever, you're going to churn out a lot more work and a lot more images just to work from. So yeah, just keep on doing that.
Thank you. I really appreciate your work too. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you again, Devin. Really appreciate it. It's, I haven't really gotten to look at your work in that kind of scope. So it's really cool getting to see it all and more, just like actually getting to hear you talk about it.
My pleasure, man.
So it's awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for having
Okay,
me.
everybody. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and then come back and kind of do a debrief and look at work if anybody has it. Sound good?
Enjoy, guys.
Okay.
Take care.
See you, Devin.
Bye.